There are many strategies for getting rid of the state. Many of them espouse to do it from within, and some others say that they're doing it externally. Now, nobody really says outright, but that's how it is perceived. There's been many literature about this, or a lot of literature about this, but I'm not going to refer to any particular one, but we'll do a job of trying to explain the overview of what the landscape of ideas in this sort of question, with regards to this question, looks like. Hello and welcome, and you're listening to the 12th episode of Fostering Freedom. I'm your host, Ohranje Gallante, and today we're going to talk about how we're going to delete the state from within. Now, apart from what I mentioned early on, let's get one thing right, and that is what means are there, right? I'm not going to get into the nitty-gritty, but rather broadly define two means from an anarcho-capitalist Hoppian perspective. And those are political means and economic means. This wouldn't be an episode about how to destroy a state to put another one in charge, although it can be construed as such, but these are solutions to, depart it from our lives, thankfully, or, if God wills, permanently, right? So let's talk about what political means are, or means are, and economic means are. Political means mean, you can think of them as argumentative or demonstrative, and economic means really are demonstrative, right? And what that means is political means involve something that isn't necessarily voluntary, right? And economic means would be completely voluntary. So, for example, political means would be, an example of a political means would be winning an election, right? An example of economic means would be, just making a cruise city and calling it a territory, and, if it goes well, people voluntarily join there. But let's go through some political means first. And one of the most common ways that people espouse of changes or try to get changes are democratic means. And democratic means mainly via legislation. So get elected or get some talking point out there, and then, try to make changes eventually and make the state smaller or something of that order or in that direction, right? Now, the problem with this is, and what I think, as I'm giving my perspective, I will tell you the pros and cons of these things. And, a lot of these things usually just have cons, except for a few of them, which do have pros here and there. But with legislation, there's a web of bureaucracy and politicization or politicking, as it happens, that really will never get rid of the state. Because a lot of people think that, we have legislation, and ultimately legislation will get rid of it. Well, if you think about it, any problem, if there's if there's gasoline fire somewhere, you cannot really think that, you'll just keep pouring gasoline on it until all the world's gasoline runs out, and then the fire will put out itself. And that is the position of the legislators. People, often misconstrue this to be the accelerationist position, but really, this is what the legislative position is: to get rid of a dumpster fire that is lit by gasoline by pouring all the world's gasoline in it, and hoping that it goes away. It's not going to happen, because what happens is, let's say I propose a regulation. Usually, one regulation doesn't solve the entire problem, right? So, let's say you build half an engine of a car, and it runs somehow, somewhat. It runs here and there, it can move, like tires are moving. And somebody says, well, what you got to do is put more pistons in and put more parts in, and you just put one more part in turns out that that part, just putting that one part in, didn't do all that, good, or maybe it even stopped it, and you would be like, well, it's not working, let's just take it out, or solve this problem in some other way, and people get derailed. And this is how it happens in politics all the time. What libertarians don't understand, the democratic type, is that you cannot really have a victory like that where you propose a solution to a problem, a little bit of a solution, and think that, okay, everything else is just going to be maintained. Perhaps it may create a lot more problems that you don't really anticipate at the moment. And a lot of voters actually are not as dumb as people would think in this department, at least. The direction that they're going is towards hell, of course, but or towards communism rather. Maybe there's no difference there, but they understand that, okay, this libertarian saying, let's just make for example, drugs legal, or something like that. We don't necessarily want that, because if it's a state issue, let's imagine that, right? Let's imagine that it's a state issue. Let's say you're living in Wyoming or somewhere, and you legalize all drugs. Now, what's going to happen to this society is there's going to be so many hipsters or whatever around just to enjoy that benefit, right? Just to have legal drugs. And of course, there may be industry that ultimately gets set up, and drug peddlers or whatever, but that is not necessarily what people want, right? And that is not necessarily what libertarians want either, right? It's just a small facet there that necessarily people, you don't necessarily have to make these things illegal. Like, of course, in a libertarian order, people will have different societies with different preferences, with no overarching sort of ruler to precisely keep changing rules all the time, right? You would agree to the terms. So if you agree to a society with no drugs or whatever consumption allowed, then that wouldn't happen. It's not like, okay, just because we're libertarians, let's just keep allowing it and whatever. So these are examples of what really legislation brings about. And there's so many other things. It may try to remove a regulation relating to business or something like that, and people usually trust libertarians with this sort of stuff. So perhaps they do get rid of it, and turns out it creates fraud or something like that, right? It removes some regulation and starts creating a lot more problems. So people don't necessarily want that, and legislators understand it, and of course this can be turned against you. So it has to be, done in a way which is extremely strategic, where everything you do one after another is in such an order that it only creates upsides. It doesn't create, very many downsides for the other people to attack you. That, it creates so many upsides that it is visible to everyone, right? Now, usually what libertarians try to do is they try to grasp on whatever's thrown at them, right? So they take this Rothbardian logic, and I am a huge critic of Rothbardian logic or strategy when it comes to getting towards stateless society, right? And I don't think he was right on the ways to go about it at all. He was very optimistic, so that may have played a role in that. But the other thing is in political means, and you got to move on from legislation. I can keep getting frustrated about it, but I think you get the point. And the other thing is nullification, right? And I really wanted to make this point across later on, but I guess, I'll just get on with it. And nullification is basically, if you know about sanctuary cities, of course, nobody has a favorable opinion of it, at least in right-wing circles, but sanctuary cities represent something that is very dear to libertarians. I mean, it's not immigration from every sector of society or whatever. What really does mean by sanctuary cities is that that city is dictating its own rules against the US Constitution, against the state constitution or whatever, right? And, it's not that the state is coming after them, really, But they can do that. And what that means is that they can do that for anything. It's not just immigration that they're doing it for. And this is what has led to the concept of gun sanctuaries in the USA, right? That they have states where there's gun nullification, so they nullify federal laws. And someone was telling me recently that in Wyoming, apparently the police in Wyoming can arrest federal agents on their soil. So, ATF or whatever, these agencies cannot really just go about raiding homes in Wyoming. And if they do come at your doorstep, you can apparently shoot them or something like that. So that's one thing that nullification has accomplished there. And this can be of any kind, right? So the strategy is going to be something like, okay, we simply start abolishing or eroding the power of the state, the power of the federal government by a form of decentralization that goes through nullification, and we nullify everything that we don't agree with, and every state can have its own nullification. So whether it be housing codes is something, as another thing that I've heard, or even sanctuary cities. If somebody far away wants to create that, sure, whatever, at least people can move to areas where they can nullify the bad things, even, right? And this is the kind of thing that I think, is basically signifying of this one code. Like, I don't know who it is from, but, I keep remembering it all the time when I look at anything. It's that when empires fall, usually when empires fall or something like that, they don't go out with a bang, but with a whimper. And what that really means is, okay, if nullification keeps on happening, the US federal government's powers will start restricting, right? And eventually it will have less and less to spread into, right? And this is, I think, related to the 10th Amendment or something like that, but, and that will eventually just kill its influence altogether, slowly, because we can then see people nullifying at the city level, which they are already doing, at the town level, because if states can nullify, so can towns, right? So can cities, so can counties. And slowly people will start nullifying all these nonsense rules and regulations, and we are paving the way for radical decentralization, right? Which ties in wonderfully to another strategy, which is secession. Now, secession is one of the best strategies from a libertarian perspective, where you just secede, right? You just get out of the main machinery, and it doesn't have to be violent, or it doesn't have to be, any of that people imagine. Many of wars have tainted the name of, people divorcing with their state in a bad light. And it is exactly like a divorce, which is what people don't understand. Would you consider it immoral if your wife serves you divorce papers, or if someone's husband wants to get divorced from their wife, and the wife or the husband starts beating them up and submitting them, despite them having legitimate reasons to divorce them or whatever, just starts beating them up for submitting them, and when they try to get away from them, right? And no matter what you do, you keep beating them up until they submit to you, until they're held hostage. Is this a moral situation? Is this something that really is so, something to be proud of? Is this something to be so patriotic about, that you're, keeping someone hostage, and, you're forcing them a pride, you're forcing a pride down their throat, which they really don't want to be part of, right? And that's what has happened everywhere around the world, where people are so terrified of secession that it is something that is unthinkable for most of the people. And a lot of people, of course, in America, this is the case, especially not in the South. At least that's the impression that I get from the people that I've talked to. But In other places around the world, it is a very, it's a very bad thing because people don't want to think of it like a peaceful departing, right? They think of it as it usually goes. And the way it usually goes is, okay, I announce that I want to secede from your territory, from your, subjugation or whatever you might want to call it. And then the other party, the other side, just goes chimp mode, right? Just starts waging wars, starts going full aggro on you, starts demonizing you. All the while, they want to keep you around. So what's the point, right? Or what's the point if you, as soon as I'm trying to get away, start degrading, demonizing, and then also making claims that no, we're all together, we're all part of this and this and that, and keep me hostage like that. It's very manipulative, and it has happened all throughout the world. Look at the Middle East. It happened there a lot. Look at South Asia. It happened there tons. So in fact, promises were broken there, and this is the problem. These are some of the political strategies, and one of the other ones is a top-down revolution, right? So there's two kinds of revolutions. I think most people are familiar with the down-up revolutions, where people like the Jacobins of France did the French Revolution or whatever, and that is a down-up revolution. And the top-down revolution, what would be an example of top-down revolution? I don't really know. Perhaps some kind of a coup d'etat would be a top-down revolution. Some kind of a, perhaps maybe even, Soviet Russia may be considered a top-down. I don't know. It doesn't fall in that, I know. But, because of the nature of who was in charge, I'm thinking that it may, be like that. But I don't know. Let's not get into the specifics. The point is, a top-down revolution is when you get the elites on your side, and then, of course, the people follow. And the down-up revolution is you get the people on your side, and then elites have to follow, right? So the problem with the top-down revolution is that incentives are not in line, right? So the problem with common sense and responsibility is that no one's incentives are in line. Everybody is like in this childish, infantilized phase because of a high time preference, where they think that, okay, we can have all the free stuff that we want in the world, and that's what my ideology is promising you, and that is what gets you to power. So nobody in power really wants to get rid of it because it benefits them by staying in power and they espouse it. The people don't want to get rid of it because now they're dependent on the supply of cash that the government is giving them, or a supply of regulations or whatever that are benefiting them, whether it be corporate welfare or, people's welfare. And people usually think that, well, the corporation types, the, free market guys must be in favor of corporate welfare. Well, no, the corporate guys are retarded. I don't know who the corporate guys are, probably neoliberals or whatever. But both these groups should not be advantaged, or any of these groups should not be advantaged, right? And, the corporate guys are, of course, happy and interested because of this nonsense where they say the government can save you, the government can give you this and that. So their incentives are in line to support these politicians and, support regulation that helps them, of course, by getting rid of their competition. I think more and more people are getting aware of this, which is a good thing. And the people are, of course, like I said, their incentives are in line because they're getting free checks, they're getting free jobs, raises in minimum wages or whatever. And, even to the unemployed, because unemployment increases as minimum wage goes up, it's not really the prices. The prices may go up, but the real victim is unemployment. So unemployment increases, but of course, they're not going to blame it on the government, right? It is the problem with the seen and unseen, as Bastiat talks about, right? Henry Hazlitt also, kind of repeats the message, and he credits Bastiat for it. And people see that, okay, it was a corporation that laid them off when they had to pay them more money. That's what they see, right? And they get angry over it. So all the incentives are in line to the anti-libertarian side, right? I mean, the complete opposite. It's not even just the Republicans. It is communists, right? I mean, let's call them what they are. So how do you, in a democratic situation, get a top-down or down-up revolution? I don't think it's possible. People think that, okay, we will get there. And, once we get there, since we are talking about that, let's imagine a scenario in which we get there, right? And one point, by the way, going back to the nullification, one point that I wanted to make there was that if you look at the territorial voting map of the United States, most of it is completely red. It's very few areas that are actually really influencing the vote. So if nullification actually do go through in multiple places, as it does, most of the places will become red, right? So most of the places maybe not in lines with each other and having different notifications for different things. They will become red, and that will be ultimately a good thing, I think, as the economy of these places improves over time because of these stupid laws that are nullified. And so the United States may really become just what it was conceptualized with this, which is loosely tied states, right, with their own autonomy, so to speak. Anyway, what I was talking about was, let's talk about when we do get to that point of, okay, let's say libertarians are elected in charge, right, and what that means. And this is going to be a particularly long episode, I think, because it's already 22 minutes and I haven't even got into the economic section. Anyway, what that means is, okay, once we do have a party in power, as people say that, okay, if there was a party ever to get in power, its sole purpose should be to dismantle the state and then, step down or, erase itself. The problem with that is that that party is going to perpetually spend time in trying to erase the state and make excuses that, oh, we are doing it, we're raising the state, we want to make sure it goes through smoothly so no one's hurt, no one's this and no one's that. And there's a point to this. You don't want to just go full speed with it, because otherwise a lot of people may end up getting hurt. Property disputes may never be resolved. I mean, so many things that get in all of these things to mess it up, right? So you never know. And the incumbents then have the excuse, right? And they don't have any incentives to resolve this issue as fast as possible. And this is what I don't like about Hopper's strategy as well, where he mentions it just, in a few lines, the strategy of, if even there were to be a party regarding this, which, he even states like that, it should just dissolve itself after the fact. Well, I don't know why he even considers that would happen. Yeah, it's an emotional or a moral possibility, and I think he's putting too much faith into humans to be able to do that, because there's no incentives there to dissolve such a party, right? So that is pretty much the scenario for political means for dismantling a state, right? And the last bit is revolution, right? Revolt against the state. And for that, I think, unless it is combined with any of the aforementioned strategies, that is, or not aforementioned, but let's say in particular secession, it is not going to work, right? Because what is a revolution without a cause? What's your cause? Okay, we want to get rid of the state. Okay, then what? Nobody really has any idea what to do or where to go after the fact, which is a good thing, because that's what we want, so that let the chips fall where they may, right? But in the process, it may just turn out to be that, a lot of vested interests turn out to control the flow of the narrative, right? And then we may end up exactly where we started with, or maybe even worse. So the threat that the socialists give, that, okay, this is what Ancapism is or Ancapistan is, might actually turn out to be true, and then this whole thing will be kept. So let's move on to the economic means section. And again, economic means Voluntary means demonstrative. They are not argumentative or getting people to our side type of thing or whatever. And let's lay out what the strategies are there for dismantling the state. Now, you may think that the economic means may not be as effective as political means because the political means have that sort of machismo behind it, have some kind of a process, some kind of a Hollywood construction feel to it, right? Not a construction in terms of hardware or buildings, but it's like constructed in your mind. It's like a story, right? Piece by piece. It's like Lego. But the problem is, those are actually pretty bad. It's just the glorification of these memes that have led you to create a certain image in your mind. I recommend to people who are really trying to get disillusioned from all this circus of society to completely get rid of or, minimize extremely your exposure to movies and TV shows and all this nonsense, especially if you do expose yourself to that, expose yourself to something so nonsensical that it is just purely mindless entertainment, right? Like, what do? I mean, I'm not recommending that my way is the best way or whatever, but when I do try to watch anything or am made to watch any of this, I just watch some reality TV nonsense, right? And that actually helps me better be connected with reality. I'm telling you. The reason is because they're so insane and so stupid, and all this is really, just stupidity that it boggles your mind, and you're like, well, let's get back to whatever we're doing and make better observations or whatever. So anyway, the economic means are basically means that are demonstrated, like I said, voluntary, and in this, the scope for destroying the state is actually pretty good. Now, why is that? Well, no matter what the political means are, politics and economics are inseparable so long as the state exists. Now, why is that? Because in any of these political means, you have to economize, right? You have to calculate. You cannot get out of scarcity. And so long as scarcity exists, any kind of political means will be restricted by economics at the end of the line. Economics isn't restricted by politics itself. Economics is not a separate thing. Economics is just actions that you and I take, right? So even politicking is an economic action in one way or another. Everything is, right? That is, everything that is reason, that is a human endeavor, is an economic action, right? And is an economic thing. So even when you're politicking, it's not a separate entity to economics, that you can't really set aside economics. You have to take it with you. It's like laws of physics, right? I mean, I'm not equating physics to economics. It's, don't think that economics is like physics at all when you're trying to study it. You're going to be misguided, by a lot of people into thinking that. But, it's like you can't really escape it. You have to work with it, right? And then you can maybe try to get somewhere. So if we actually get rid of the economic power that the state has, the state itself will become helpless and disarmed completely. Now, many a strategy are under this, and the first one that I want to talk about is agorism, or agorism, however it's pronounced. It's counter-economics, right? Briefly put, Sam Konkin III was the one who came up with agorism. He was actually a fan of Rothbard's and libertarian movement, and he very well understood it, and I wouldn't say he understood it completely. He missed out on a couple of things, but other than that, he completely understood what it was about, what the revolution was against, and what the revolt was against, or what the complaint is against, and the points that we put across, and his moral alignment with all of this is is 1-to-1, right? Well, with the exception of a couple things, but we'll leave that for some other time. What it is black marketism, if I can put it in that way. What really it says is that people should, instead of utilizing the state, utilize the black market, right? And trade with each other with the black market. And he has a calculation on, well, it's a basic formula of like the probability of you being caught or how much you're going to pay if you're getting caught, the chances of you getting caught, and what you got to sell your product at. So, let's say if you go for a year without getting caught, and your fine is $10,000 and you make $50,000 in profit, well, you just, you still keep your 40,000, right? And so long as, let's say, your taxes are, on the other hand, 25-30%, you're still paying less than your taxes, right? So you can get away with black marketing a lot of things, right? And creating a lot of black markets here and there. And if everybody starts doing this, starts black marketing, buying from black markets and selling stuff in black market, the state will ultimately get weakened because it doesn't really have any money. He gives a lot of examples. He gives examples of, people like the truck drivers with truck regulations and speeding regulations, busting those speed spots or whatever, and overloading trucks and all that, and they would make convoys and go, don't stop, and just nonstop sailing through states in high speeds or whatever. So these are things that he thinks will essentially weaken the state. Now, the problem with this strategy should be quite obvious for anybody, and that is, there's a couple problems. The first problem is that persuasion is the Achilles heel of agorism. That is, it is not entirely an economic means thing, right? Well, while it is counter-economic and economically it is completely sound, it isn't necessarily, something that is unrelated to argumentation. It is still dependent on a lot of argumentation by being persuasive. So you have to persuade a lot of people to go to the black market, do this, to do that, to weaken the state. And, that isn't for everybody because, first of all, you got to make people trust the black market. It's not just a 30-second conversation, right? It's a long conversation that you got to do with them in order to convince them about these things, right? And you got to go back and forth. And a lot of people actually do that, and, salute to them. But most of the people are not driven by this. And I care about most of the people in this thing because it is entirely driven by persuasion. So it's like a problem in and of itself, right? The other problem with agorism is that I don't think Sam Konkin himself really experienced, or, I don't really want to attribute that, but still, I have experienced, so I can say this. Maybe I'm misguided, maybe I'm missing something from the equation, but Sam Konkin, I don't think he experienced black market and the state's rat all that much, because the problem with the black market strategy is that in his formula, let's say that you're getting caught once, you pay 10,000 over, a 50,000 earnings, and you still keep 40,000, right? Well, what if the amount of fines that you keep getting, or the amount of times you keep getting caught, keeps increasing, right? So in a given year, instead of getting caught once, you keep getting caught twice, right? And the same product that is on the white market ultimately becomes less expensive in contrast to the black market item. And this is something that he acknowledges as well, right? So that's the persuasion strategy that, everybody's got to go black market and cheap, sell for cheaper and get the white market guys out of here and, thus get the state out of here. But the problem is most of the people in the white market would much rather just have a shop there and not risk it getting, raided or shut down or whatever, just for selling toothbrushes in the black market, right? And there's not a lot of margin there. Yeah, on the bulk of the entire product, there's, probably profit, but if they start cracking down more and more on you, then really, according to that equation, the white market is more worth it than the black market. And this is what happens, and this is what I've seen happen in real life as well. When I was growing up, and nearly every product that I bought, I could swear that it had some black market involvement. And over time, as regulations have increased, it's not really the regulations that did it, it's the enforcement, right? As the enforcement for these products increased in these markets, down to everything like oil and house supplies, these products really got priced out, right, in the black market. And in response to this, to keep the products cheaper in the black market, the quality of products went down, right? So they, while before the quality kept improving and you had trusted vendors or whatever, as regulations kept coming in, as there were incentives to clamp down on the black market or whatever, the quality of the black market products reduced in response to keep the black market cheap and alive. And everybody soon, started to buy in the white market as more and more people of these kept getting caught. It wasn't just worth it to do business in the black market, and the black market completely eroded. So how is something that is so fragile and so easily taken over by the government able to fight the government at the same time? I mean, it entirely depends on persuasion, as you can see, because it is a form of civil disobedience, right? It is like a tax protest in the long way around, and that's why it isn't going to work. As the enforcement increases on any of these markets that we are talking about, the black market goes away, right? Whatever it is for the white market, right? So if the product is there in the white market and it's also there in the black market, eventually if the enforcement increases in the black market products end up being pricier in terms of just cost to produce it than the white market product, right? And this is why the only things that are in existence in the black market, well, not the only things, but the majority of the things are things that are already illegal, right? Things that are just completely legal. So that means that they can fetch a higher price for it. So, you have all sorts of drugs and guns, illegal guns, automatic firearms, these sorts of things. Though I don't believe automatic firearms should be legal, but it is what it is, and they are aptly priced as such, right? And that is not killing the state necessarily, right? I mean, it's just that the state has acknowledged that they are legal and everybody can have them, sure, yeah, but they're still pricey, right? So that's how the black market responds. And how are you going to convert the white market stuff to the black market stuff now after the white market stuff has already become cheaper? I think you get my point, right? The other part of this economic strategy is the monopoly method, right? And what is the monopoly method? Well, the monopoly method is, and I'll tie it into a point that I'll make later as well, but the monopoly method really is just, how do I say it? Let's say imagine Standard Oil, right? Or any other big company. Now, what happens there? Is it libertarian to support monopolies and, these kind of big companies or whatever? No, well, the thing with monopolies is, one thing is for sure, in a market that is relatively unhampered, like the US was before, right? It wasn't a free market by any stretch of the imagination, but it was much less hampered as compared to today. And so, how did Standard Oil become so big? Standard Oil was efficient. In the free market, people are usually saying that, well, the monopolies are bad or whatever. Well, how are monopolies created in a free market? If somebody's offering, even the guys who are making arguments for monopolies or against monopolies admit that, okay, let's say somebody undercuts you or gives you the lesser price and then becomes the monopoly. What happens then? Well, you admit that, okay, somebody's giving a good product for a much less price than someone else. And that's how they become a monopoly. Well, that is how they become a monopoly in such situations, right? In non-free, relatively free markets, what really happens is that these companies are the best providers of services, right? And that's why they are there with the price that they have. Standard Oil was actually giving great deals to its customers, and that is why it was in the position. That is why but that's why it was able to maintain that position, for so long, kept continuously bribing the government officials or whatever, right? And this became a threat to the government, and that's why they broke it. In fact, a lot of antitrust itself was formed for cartelization, right? And Rothbard writes beautifully in this that, what is the purpose of a cartel? If you think about it, don't sell for higher than me. Let's say 5 people are in a cartel, 5 companies. Don't sell higher than me, don't sell lower than me, and don't sell at the same price, because that would be collusion, right? So what they all do in a cartel is sell at relatively, in grouping of prices, right? So you don't really have price gouging, you don't really have undercutting, or you don't have collusion at the same time. And that was the goal of the cartel, and the way they got it installed was through the antitrust laws. And if you look at the antitrust laws, that's what they are. They are anti-gouging, they are anti-collusion, and they are anti-undercutting, right? So what can you do? These are the ways to compete in a market. So there's nothing left, right? And you wonder why. So that is one of the methods that the government, really saw, that these companies, private companies, are going to have a lot of influence over society. And what we got to do is we got to use the tools at our disposal to do something about it, to eliminate competition. See, government is always at competition with each other. And somebody was making a point that, why did the Americans go after Europe and go after these monarchs and go after all these, places? People always throw around, well, America went after monarchs, and, Woodrow Wilson went after the monarchs. Well, why? What's the problem with the monarchs, especially considering that a lot of these monarchs are not really tyrannical or anything like that they are made out to be. Once you go through what they were doing, especially not as tyrannical as the United States government today, or even back then, in a lot of aspects. Well, the real thing is that the United States saw that through introducing democracy, it can, basically institute its agendas better, right? And that is what it has done. That is what history has proven that it's done. That by utilizing democracy, American interest can be made more acceptable worldwide, right? And it's almost like what Sun Tzu says, right? Or Sun Tzu, whatever his name is, that if you can take the hand of your enemy and make him do what you will do to them for you, then you have already won, right? So it was a grand strategy in a way, where America eliminated the competition, right? Which was really just this anti-democratic forces in the name of monarchy, and installed democratic forces in place, which would be more, conducive for its interests. And that's how they got rid of, these empires, or not really just empires, these monarchies, whatever. Not that they were not in decline already, but yeah. So that's how they see it. They eliminate competition. Government is also not in a vacuum in and of itself. Yeah, it is in a state of anarchy with each other governments, but within it, it doesn't want any internal competition, right? It's like a school bully almost, or something like that, or let's say you're in a school and you start teaching better than the teacher. Well, of course, the teacher gonna be, jealous of you, whatever, over time, if you start building your own classes or something like that, or if you start becoming a better principal, right? So that's why they eliminate you. So this is what they did. But monopoly method, to go back to what it is really just this, right? Get big enough to be a threat to the government and start performing a lot of its functions in different ways. And we have to get a lot more companies to do this, to start providing and circumventing the government system, making sort of alternate governance platforms in the market for living together, or goods and services, or whatever, through membership, something like that, some market way to do it, right? Just that it's not perhaps right now cheap enough to do this. And perhaps over time it may become so, and maybe then we will start seeing this, although I don't have a lot of hope for this. The last thing that I've mentioned for the economic methods is private cities. And these are my personal favorites, because what they are essentially pre-contracted cities, and that is essential to understand that they're pre-contracted, right? So, well, pre-contract is kind of redundant, I would say, because you basically sign on to a contract for living together, whatever, just like a deal, and live in a private city. That's it. You agree to the rules already of what the game is, and then you get to live there. Simple as. So what they do is really just provide better services or whatever to citizens, right, than the cities that they're living in. And this is as demonstrative as it gets, right? As demonstrative in terms of liberty as it gets, because people are, without even calling themselves libertarian, without even calling themselves anything like that, they're going to be like, okay, well, this is a private city. This looks pretty good. There's so many, nice facilities or whatever that we don't really have, and may start moving there, right? And when they move there, well, if it operates well, they're going to live there and continue living there, right? And, the cities, this concept is going to take off. Now, if you imagine the world in a state of anarchy right now, or, in a giant free market, right? And imagine all these countries and all the people, so to speak, in a state of free market from just an outsider perspective, right? You're in outer orbit and you look at it, all these countries are like vendors, right? In a giant web of free market, right? If you think about it, who has the most freedom right now? Well, it's the people that are wealthy. They can do whatever. So the price of liberty is very high. And as time goes on, what happens in the market? The markets are deflationary. And the price of freedom has come down, because a lot of services that otherwise were only reserved for kings and the most free people of their times are now available to the common man. So isn't it the market at work by providing you services, in a sense, or in a roundabout way, freedoms that you didn't have before? Right now, anybody can just, when they don't feel like it, get up and leave if they have enough money to better locations, right? Better pastures. And they have this freedom around the world. This is the free market of the world, you can say, with enough money, you can do whatever. And as time goes on, the price that is required to have this kind of freedom will go down. And private cities will play a quintessential role in this, right? By being, well, private cities and next to each other, they can really have better services and different kinds of services to different types of cities. So maybe Christians want their own city, maybe Catholics want their own city, maybe, any preferences you take, right? That, only short-haired men in the city, and they probably have their own city. Well, that's really far out, but these are more plausible, that initially is just going to be on the basis of taxes, or religion, or any of these things where you want better schooling or something else for your child or something like that, right? And they eventually will just win out in the game of the market without having any libertarian talking point ever said, even once, just to get people there, right? So the concept is like, okay, just get people here, by other people having seen how we perform, right? And eventually, so many private cities will be there that they will puncture these nations and, make them have such a high demand because of this demonstration that they have done of how much better they are, that other people will be like, okay, we gotta make private cities as well because the demand is so high, they can fetch a lot of price or whatever, and then more and more people will start doing it. More and more governments will start bending their knee to do it because they don't have much option to make money from other places if people are leaving, right? So they better just save what they have, and eventually these private cities can puncture these nations and create a very secessionist and a very conducive environment for Ancapism, right? Where a lot of states do exist, but when the states exist, while the states exist, the amount of private cities keeps on increasing over time, and we are heading more and more towards Ancapistan as this is happening, where so many like clusters and clusters of cities and towns and counties and rural villages start becoming, these private cities by demonstration. That's it. So, one example there is of some kind of a Karachi city, right, where I don't remember the name of the place, but it's in or the name of the city, the private city, but it's in Pakistan where there's no electricity, right? I mean, but there is electricity. It's not just continuous. There's no regular water supply, and there's no regular anything really. So what this city aims to do is that it is in the middle or on the outskirts of their financial capital, that is Karachi, right? Their port city, and it is going to provide them with all these things: 24/7 power, 24/7 water. It's their responsibility how they're going to get it. I've seen it happen here where they have power backups, giant generators for entire buildings and whatever. They have it in UAE as well. Power or water reserve, to provide water for days in case the water's out, and so many other things. So that is one alternative where people are flocking to within their place. And why they are doing that? Because, well, there's little to no taxes there. It's just a better living condition. Overall, that's a bonus. That's a lot of people just want better living conditions, because in a lot of these places, what happens is, despite you having a lot of money, you don't have access to these services. As strange as it sounds, despite how much money you have, a lot of things you just can't do, and it's extremely frustrating. And a lot of people have this problem, right? Where despite having money, and I used to have this problem. I mean, I'm not, rich as hell by any imagination. So, I couldn't get a good internet provider no matter how much I wanted to pay for it, right? So I was ready to pay a lot of, let's say 10 times more than the cost of the internet that I had at the time. And it was really cheap internet, right? So it's not like 10 times means thousands of dollars, right? It just was $100 or something like that. And I was ready, after the 10 timing, I was ready to pay for it, but there was nobody to supply it, right? So a lot of places like this have this, have this problem. And of course, this is not going to be like a one-size-fits-all solution. All cities are going to be different for different kinds of people and different locations. What is working in Karachi may not work in, Amsterdam or something. So, if you make a private city in Amsterdam and say that, well, we got 24/7 electricity and water, everybody's going to be like, no big deal. So for them, there's got to be a different proposition, right? And, maybe they don't want any refugees or or something like that, which is actually something that is a point here in these private city projects, right? We have right now Prospera as well is another one. It's not truly private, of course. In the start, they're not going to be like that. And of course, initially, they will be expensive. So, right now, I think it is about 400, 500,000 that you gotta have in order to live in these places. Or not have, maybe your net worth has got to be that. right, to live in these places and enjoy the tax benefits, right, of not paying much at all. So that is who this is for. But eventually, the prices are going to come down, right? It's going to soon become more and more accessible as more and more of these things are created. And yeah, that's how it is. These are the strats that I have laid out so far, and I think all the other stats or strats kind of fall within these strats, right? So, let's say the monopoly one, you may give the example of Elon Musk creating some kind of a libertarian utopia. I don't think he's a libertarian, but let's imagine some kind of a Peter Thiel like personality doing this. Well, it will fall under some kind of a monopoly strategy. I just named it that. It may be anything else. You may call it a merchant strategy, if you will. But all these strategies are actually, the way I see it, destroying the state from within, right? And the reason they are doing that is because they're all working from within the state. You can't really escape the state. Yeah, we're not talking about a particular state here. We're talking about the entire thing, right? So the state as a concept itself. No matter what you do, you're gonna utilize the state's diplomatic resources, their physical resources, assets such as roads and stuff, to accomplish what you're doing, right? And so, no matter what strategy you take here, whether the political or the economic, or any, subsection out of that, you will still be working within the state, right, to destroy it. And any strategy would be doing that. So, all of these are really strategies for destroying the state from within. In fact, any strategy is going to be a within the state solution. It's not going to be a parallel to the state solution, because even if you are doing something that is alternative, not in the eyes of the state, it is still, utilizing things from the state. Now, people may not classify it as a within the state strategy, but that's how I see it. Anyway, that's beat it. I thought it really was gonna run a lot longer than this, but thankfully it's open or over in less than an hour. Do let me know if you have any other strategies in mind or any other alternatives to what I've presented, any criticisms, any feedback, or anything that I may have missed out here that you may think is very crucial. In fact, I have that lingering feeling right now, but I don't know. Maybe I haven't really missed out anything and I'm just, feeling like that or whatever. But anyway, I'll see you guys later. Make sure to comment whatever it is. If you have anything like that, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and join my Discord, follow me on Twitter, and all these sort of things. And I'll see you guys next time.